Thank you. I really appreciate this opportunity to talk to you. It's the first time I've spoken here. It's actually the first time I've spoken since high school. I hope this goes better than that. Fasten your seatbelts. A little bit of background. I was raised Lutheran, and I have never thought much about it when I was a kid, but I grew a lot more cantankerous when I entered my teens. I grew more cantankerous about everything when I entered my teens. I was a pretty solitary kid, lonely, miserable, confused, and angry. My best friends growing up were books and my radio. The popular music of the day enthralled me, as it still does. When I was about 13, I started reading about philosophy, psychology, personality theory, and religion. Anything that might give me a clue to the mystery that was me. And I spent a lot of time brooding over the various ideas I'd read about. And it never did me any good. I believed I was pretty smart, but that conflicted with how unhappy I was. As I grew older, I became very, very bitter and cynical and misanthropic. I was not a very nice guy. Just trust me on this. In Mary Shelley's great novel, Frankenstein, which is nothing like any of the movies, the monster screams at Dr. Frankenstein, at his creator, for giving him life. He screams, "I am malicious because I am miserable." And I could relate to that. As an adult, I tried my hand at fundamentalist Christianity, but it never really took. Then I became a bitter atheist. I'd vacillate between fundamental Christianity and nihilism. Somehow I figured those were my only two options. Then I had an accident which put me in the hospital for quite a while. I got out of the hospital and I felt shattered. I realized now that God had pressed the restart button on my life. Bonnie had been coming to the center for a while, and she suggested I talk to some guy named Reverend Dave Bell, that guy, fabulous guy over there in the blue shirt. So we emailed a bit, then he suggested we meet. We met for coffee, and during our conversation, Dave said to me calmly, almost offhandedly it seemed to me, "Rob, you're an expression of the divine." I'm an expression of the divine. My life changed at that moment. In my religious upbringing and all my reading, I had never been told anything like that. When Dave told me that, I suddenly felt peaceful, and intuitively, it felt true. Weird and amazing, and true in a visceral sort of way. All of the integral, yet wrecked, shattered, and scattered parts of me seemed to sit up, take notice, and come toward each other, to join up, and I healed. I started healing. And I have found that I am an expression of the divine is the starting point for all the explorations and extrapolations that have followed and that continue. Everything I know about who I am, my place in the world, everything I am and everything that I am not, my relationship to the world and everything and to everything and everyone in it stems from that sentence. First and foremost, we are truly expressions of the divine. Oh, and by the way, you get to define divine however you want to. I know how I define it, but if yours is different, that's fine. Now, some of you may have seen films directed by the great Swedish director Ingmar Bergman. They are important art films, ponderous explorations of characters and of the meaning of life and how to live it. I recommend Cries and Whispers, The Seventh Seal, The Virgin Spring, and Wild Strawberries. Those are my favorites. The reason I mention Ingmar Bergman is because in more than one of his films, a character pauses and says, "How then are we to live?" That seems to me to be the basic question of philosophy, including spiritual philosophy. With a nod to my own pretensions and presumptions, I will now offer you my answer to that question. You know, first of all, one of the things I love about the center is if you come here and you hear something, you don't have to agree with it. So if you think everything I say is a bunch of baloney, that's fine with me. It won't hurt my feelings. Thank you for hearing me. I'm so honored by that. Those who know me know that I am a nature freak. My dad and I used to take long walks together in parks and wooded areas. I grew up in Jackson. Maybe some of you may know Ellisharp Park, fabulous park in Jackson County. And of course, Buffy, my Cocker Spaniel, was with us. Now I take long walks by myself or with Bonnie in the neighborhoods and along the Huron River. Birds and trees and plants of all kinds and shapes and sizes, and the river itself, wind and clouds and the endless sky, and me. I stand there and I am consistently aware, intuitively aware, mind you, that there is a presence bigger than me, and not necessarily better than me, but certainly grander than me. There is a difference between those two, better and grander. In that grandeur, I have the wisdom to be silent, to listen, look, smell, feel, and taste. I can't really define this grandeur of nature, but it's there in the oceans and forests, canyons, mountains, and rivers, and the sky. Maybe you've experienced it on your travels if you've seen an ocean or a beach or mountains or caverns, or maybe if you've seen a whale or any kind of animal, or deer, a moose. Pardon? Oh, a crow. How could I forget crow? I love crows. A crow, yes. Maybe you've even held a newborn baby in your arms. I've never had kids, but I've done that, and it's like, wow, this is a human being. And it's in the small things as well. I've seen it in the intricate and infinitely varied patterns of tree bark in my walks. A maple tree and an oak tree and a pine tree all have completely different barks, and it's fascinating, the patterns there. In toads and frogs' eyes, if you look at their eye real close, there's this gold fleck patterns in there. It's so exquisitely beautiful. I wish I had eyes like a toad, but because they're really beautiful. That's not in the script, but. Or the way a turkey vulture will fly. So they can fly for over 100 miles in a day, and they rarely flap their wings. They are perched on the sky. They are perched on the sky, and it's beautiful. And there's this hydrangea plant that I planted in our yard, and it's so pretty. It's just amazing. The mystic poet William Blake wrote, "To see a world in a grain of sand and a heaven in a wildflower, hold infinity in the palm of your hand and eternity in an hour." I remember back in 1973, my friend Blair and I took this epic 2-week camping trip out in Colorado. One time I was hanging around the campsite and I didn't know where Blair was. And finally he came back and I said, "Where you been?" He proceeded to tell me that he'd been climbing and he found this place where there was this huge boulder right on the edge of a cliff. I said, "Did you shove it over?" I was a teenager. I was bombastic and knuckleheaded, and I would have just shoved it over and yahoo! Blair said he'd sat there for an hour and thought about it and then decided to leave. I never really understood that at all until I thought of it while writing this talk. Maybe to witness nature, to be quiet and really see it and learn from it, and to be quietly at one with it without screwing it up. Maybe that's the thing to do. And if we love nature, ultimately we have to ask, how high is the sky? Because really, nature includes the rings of Saturn. Nature includes the blood in our veins. We are nature. We are nature. You are nature. Be as awestruck with yourself as you are with the sunrise. And you know what? I have no idea why I can do this with my hand. I haven't even been thinking about it. If I move this flower, it's moving because I have made it move. But I have no idea why I'm doing this. I'm not telling my hand to do this. That's puzzled me ever since, as long as I can remember. Anyway, some people completely deny the body to focus on the spirit. Not me. Our physical bodily senses bring the natural world into us. And I know all that we perceive and sense matters in some way. And I can't say it in any intellectual or philosophical way why this is true, but intuitively I know that it is. All that we perceive and sense is of some importance. Sometimes if we are mindful, we can recognize truth because it is true in an intuitive and visceral way. Anyway, this presence that I'm aware of, this beautiful, mysterious, infinite grandeur, that's my definition of the divine, of God. I believe this presence is sentient and infinitely creative. We are expressions of this grandeur, or the creator of the grandeur. Your choice. We were made of the material God had on hand. I love that. I picture a workshop. Let's see. Oh, here's a little bit of Lindsay. Let's pour that into that one. We all have something, But anyway, that includes imagination, creativity, intuition, and spirit. Now think of the behavior of life forms of all species that you are familiar with or that you have learned about. Cats, dogs, birds, trees, flowers. Now think of sea anemone and redwood trees and penguins and condors and whales and insects and turtles. The list goes on and on. You know, they've just discovered a 20-limbed octopus or squid-like thing in Antarctica, I think it is. Amazing. Where was I? Anyway, the list goes on. All life forms, animals and plants have behaviors that are specific to their species. And that goes on, generation after generation. It is their nature to behave that way. One can tell the difference between an oak and a maple and a pine by the leaves or needles that they create. That is their nature. I am convinced that humans too have an innate nature. What we learn when applied becomes our secondary nature. I believe it is our primary and true nature to be open to learning, to use our learning, to be non-judgmental, to think, to be compassionate, to be imaginative and creative and intuitive, and to be gentle and kind and loving. This is our inherent true nature. Thank you. This is what all people, in wise or lousy ways, strive for. As Voltaire wrote, and I love this quote, God engraves in all hearts the law of nature. The eternal wisdom on high has engraved with his own hand natural religion in your heart. And maybe it's her hand, but whatever. It's engraved with his own hand natural religion in your heart. So why then do humans act so often so terribly? I don't know. Part of it is self-defense. If I'm walking down the street and a car comes close to me and I yell, "You knucklehead!" I think that's a biological response, adrenaline and fear. But that doesn't explain violence or war. When I got to this point and I stared at the computer, I was and am at a loss. The best I can come up with is that it has something to do with our expression of our true nature being bent out of shape or warped. War is insane and horrific. But historian Howard Zinn wrote, and this is kind of a long quote, historian Howard Zinn wrote, "To be hopeful in bad times is not just foolishly romantic. It is based on the fact that human history is a history not only of cruelty, but also of compassion, sacrifice, courage, and kindness. What we choose to emphasize in this complex history will determine our lives. If we see only the worst, it destroys our capacity to do something. If we remember those times and places, and there are so many where people have behaved magnificently, this gives us the energy to act and at least the possibility of sending this spinning top of a world in a different direction. He goes on to say, and if we do act in however small a way, we don't have to wait for some grand utopian future. The future is an infinite succession of present moments, and to live now as we think human beings should live, in defiance of all that is bad around us, it is itself a marvelous victory. Thank you. I think I did a pretty good job, and I can't tell you how much you all mean to me. I appreciate it. I love you. Thank you.